This might be a question for Norm. If we, it's my understanding that the current or just the previous generation of climate models really didn't deal very well with the changes in ocean level. Glaciers were only partly included and so on. Can you tell us something about what the real current forecasts are for changes in ocean level, and particularly how that might affect the Chesapeake Bay region?
Well, I'm not an ocean expert, but generally the models have been improving, getting coupled ocean atmosphere models and doing more realistic climate change scenarios, sort of transient climate. The IPCC is probably the best source because that's where all these models come together and do intercomparisons. And they're showing, at least globally, I would say in the 2100, about a factor of 3 more sea level rise than what we've actually already seen. And as I mentioned earlier in that chart, it was looking at a change of on the order of 200 meters. So we'd be looking at roughly 200 millimeters. So roughly on the order of 1.5 meters or so, 1 to 1.5 meters or so by 2100 is what they're currently saying. Locally, of course, that's going to be quite more, more and less in some areas. The other problems that, you hear about climate models, and a lot of the people that are skeptical about climate change is in the way that the spread of the temperature, the global temperature, which is going to be controlling the sea level rise through thermal expansion and melting of land ice. One of the big problems that climate models have, and why there's a spread in temperature of 2 to 5 degrees, which is huge in the climate scale, is really to do with clouds. That's the largest uncertainty. And so there's a lot of work now. And clouds are really tough because they're not a uniform mixed gas like CO2. They're really hard to handle, and they have a very significant effect, and the models don't handle those well. And so uncertainties in sea level rise and temperature is tied into these types of feedbacks that the models don't do well, and that's one of them.
If I could add a little bit of something that I know about, because I make underwater robots. And these free-swimming robots are now being used for the first time to actually swim underneath glaciers that are going into the ocean in the Antarctic and take a look at what's happening at a place we haven't been able to explore before. And these data are going to be very important in refining some of these models as to how these gigantic glaciers, some of which are the size of multiple states, that are sticking out into the ocean and not really floating. They're sort of like this big beam. And if that beam softens up and suddenly breaks loose, we've had several incidents in the past few years where gigantic ice shelves along the coast of Antarctica have broken off. But some of these systems we haven't been able to explore before without this robotic technology. And as we get better data, these will feed into the sea level rise models. And because there are some scary scenarios with some of these glaciers perhaps causing a much faster and much greater rate of sea level change than is out there in the press.
What you were saying about cooking oil, I wonder how much is being reused, the cooking oil, for fuel or whatever. And another thing I was wondering about, I heard somebody was saying that in big cities, the oxygen level is actually going down and causing breathing troubles. Is that true? Or you heard anything?
Well, in reference to the cooking oil question, at this stage, the use of cooking oil in cars is essentially a novelty. I mean, it's, of course, a very tiny fraction of the actual cars on the road. The reason I think it's important is that it shows that it's possible, and that at least that could be one of the arrows in the quiver, so to speak, for reducing the reliance on oil. But at the moment, there's not much of that happening, and of course there are no easy answers, because the use of biodiesel and ethanol and so on, as we're hearing a lot in the news now, also has implications for food supply, in that involves land that would otherwise be used to grow crops.
With respect to the oxygen, there's so much oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, it's almost 21% of the atmosphere, that it varies at such a tiny level that probably what you're thinking about or have read about is ground level ozone or smog. It's a reactant form of oxygen that can dramatically affect your respiratory system and cause breathing troubles. And there's often ozone clouds downstream or downwind of major cities, especially during the summer months when there's lots of solar radiation helping form it.
And there is, as you go out here, there's a display about ozone. So there's, if you have questions about that, you can go talk to those people. You had a question?
As far as global temperature increase and their effects on the glaciers melting and the water released from those interrupting the currents in the ocean, which would cause a temperature decrease. Well, I kind of learned that in one of my ecology classes, but I just had a question about that and the likelihood of the interruption of the currents actually causing a decrease in the temperature and its effects.
I think you're thinking about something that's called the conveyor belt, which moves heat around the planet in this giant ribbon of water that travels the planet, but it ends up sinking in the North Atlantic. And there is a lot of concern about Greenland because Greenland has a huge glacier on it, which if you saw Al Gore's presentation or movie, The Inconvenient Truth, there's some footage there of the glaciers melting at fantastic rates where you get Niagara Falls level flows of water in certain areas in the spaces of hours and lakes draining overnight. And a lot of this water is going down underneath the glacier, down at the bedrock level, and the glaciologists are trying to figure out, does that speed up or the travel of the glacier or not. It is true that there's a potential mechanism where if you had a sudden rush of fresh water into the North Atlantic, it's possible to shut down this conveyor belt system, which would alter the transfer of heat by the Gulf Stream across to Europe. And they used that scenario in that a sci-fi movie a few years ago. Was it called The Day After Tomorrow? So that we do have a moderate climate in Great Britain, and if we didn't have the Gulf Stream carrying heat over to Europe, Great Britain might be under a glacier right even as we speak now. So it's unlikely that we're going to have a doomsday scenario like that. Nevertheless, watching what happens in Greenland is very important to predicting the trajectory of the change that we're sort of committed to. What we are committed to, as Marty pointed out, we have a lag of about a century with the CO2 that's already in the air now and is rising, unfortunately, at a faster clip than the previous several decades have shown. We had a sobering talk at VIMS a couple of weeks ago where a climate scientist showed that the last 3 years show that we may be on an even sharper trajectory for CO2 in the atmosphere. And this is probably driven by the fact that there's lots of the second world wanting to become middle class and have the lifestyle that we have in this country where we're the most profligate users of energy and generators of CO2.